Greetings and welcome to another edition of Radical Grace Radio.
I'm Pastor Gary Held.
And my name's Matthew Pancake, and this is episode 814. And it's a program that, it just happens to meet Law and Gospel program, where what we're doing is we're teaching you, hopefully, or you're learning. We're not explicitly trying to teach. You're learning a way of thinking that is like thinking with the mind of Christ, rightly dividing Law and Gospel, and it just happens to hit on Easter.
Well, that's true.
Are we ready to say to people what we would usually say for Easter?
Sure. I mean, those of you who are listening who are a little bit ahead of Easter, just recognize it's probably Easter somewhere, depending on where the dateline is. So I can say, He is risen.
He is risen indeed. Hallelujah.
Hallelujah. Right. That's right.
Because it's true whether we say it or not. And
right.
And it's a wonderful thing to recognize that Christ is risen, and in Him we are risen as well.
Yeah, that's really interesting. The in this particular calendar year, of the lectionary that we're using, the 3-year lectionary, the epistle lesson really makes that very clear about that we are also we are setting our minds on things above, where Christ is enthroned at the right hand of God, and then when Christ says, when Christ, who is your life, appears, then you also will appear with Him. It's a really great epistle lesson, and I was so strongly tempted to say that should be my my Sunday morning message for Easter morning. I decided to go instead with the gospel account in Matthew of the empty tomb, but yeah, I gotta say, we're thinking with the mind of Christ, so that's a very important aspect of what Christian living is, and our minds are seated with Christ above, on things above, not on things below. So it's a cool thing.
Knowing you, the temptation is still great.
Oh, the temptation is great with this one.
It is. So with that, let's get the Christian news roll out of the way, which is kind of interesting because our news roll has a doctrinal issue in it. And look at you.
It does. Yeah,
you're all dressed up for the occasion as well. We can explain a little bit about that later.
If we can.
Because this is the first time that people can see that kind of thing. So maybe they're interested. So here we go. Christian news roll. Hillsong Church founder Brian Houston, who was arrested. Now, this happened last year. Okay, so he was arrested for driving under the influence of alcohol in February of 2022. It turns out that he had a blood alcohol level of 0.20%, and that it was at blackout drunk level, according to court documents. Okay, the DUI arrest occurred less than a month before Houston resigned from the global senior pastor position at Hillsong Church in March of 2022. The resignation followed revelations that 2 women had made complaints of misconduct against him in the last 10 years. If convicted on the DUI charges, Houston faces harsher penalties, including a 9-month alcohol education program. Understand, this is in Australia, right? Extensive court fines, and I like this, and more onerous terms of probation. In a recent statement, however, Houston has backed off of kind of blaming everybody else for what's going on, and he's apologized for his, quote, foolish decision and has taken full responsibility for his actions.
Okay. So later on, we're going to talk about what full responsibility is, because you brought out a good point. So anyway, the number 4 story is a federal judge in Texas has dismissed claims against a former Southern Baptist Convention leader and a seminary affiliated with the denomination. So U.S. District Judge Sean Jordan ruled that the plaintiff, referred to as Jane Roe, did not meet the standard of proof required to demonstrate that the Southwestern Baptist Theological Seminary in Fort Worth, Texas, and its former president, Paige Patterson, were negligent in preventing sexual abuse on campus. Roe had accused Patterson and the seminary of mistreating her when she reported being sexually assaulted multiple times by another former seminary student. Although Roe's claims of defamation against Patterson and Southwestern are still part of the ongoing lawsuit, the judge's recent ruling has created complications for some of the suit's more significant claims associated with Paige Patterson.
Yeah, complications.
Complications.
Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
No, complications.
Complications. So the number 3 story, the U.S. Okay. I had almost forgotten that this was a thing that was going on, but I didn't forget about the original thing that happened. So remember that there was a church in Texas that got shot up by a guy. Okay. So let's just go on from there. The U.S. Justice Department has announced a tentative settlement in a lawsuit over the 2017 mass shooting at a Texas church that killed more than 24 people. The settlement, which is subject to court approvals, will pay the victims and their families over $144 million. There's reasons for this. U.S. District Judge Xavier Rodriguez had previously ruled that the Air Force was 60% liable for the attack, as it had failed to submit Devin Patrick Kelly's assault conviction to the national database. We'll explain what that's about here in a second. Kelly had served in the Air Force before being discharged in 2014 for bad conduct after he was convicted of assaulting his former wife and stepson. Rodriguez said that had Kelly's history been entered into the database, he likely would have been prevented from buying guns from licensed firearm dealers and possessing body armor, which would have prevented him from carrying out the church shooting.
Okay, well,
that's pretty specific. You know, they were like,
yeah, no.
Here's the flow chart. Here's how he got here. Here's how you're liable. $144 million. I think and I think that a lot of that's punitive. So,
well, we'll get back to that. This is the story this is number 2 story, and this is the one you alluded to earlier, saying there's a doctrinal element in this. Okay, so Joe Rigney, the president of Bethlehem College and Seminary in Minneapolis, has resigned due to a, quote, divergence of vision with the school's board. Divergence, okay. Rigney's views on Christian nationalism and infant baptism put him at odds with the school's faith statement and other leaders at Bethlehem. Rigney's controversial views included claiming that empathy is a sin and drawing attention to his relationship with Moscow, Idaho pastor Doug Wilson, who is known for his statements in support of Christian nationalism. While Piper and the chair of the school's trustees expressed gratitude for Rigney's years of service, they noted that he is, quote, out of step with several distinctives, which Baptists have historically viewed as biblical. Rigney did not immediately respond to a request for comment. I just slipped up there, you know. Yeah,
is that a Freudian slip or just a straight up slip?
I just don't know. Yeah,
that's a Gary Held slip.
It's a slip.
It's a slip one way or the other.
Yeah.
Bet nobody can guess what the number 1 story was.
Oh, well. Lay it on us. Come on.
Well, former President Donald Trump held a rally after he had, he held a rally at his Mar-a-Lago home in Florida hours after being criminally charged with 34 felony counts, including falsifying business records and conducting an illegal, quote, catch and kill scheme that violated New York's election law. I trust me, I have no idea what they're trying to say with that catch and kill thing. Trump arrived at the sealed off courthouse in Manhattan in a Secret Service motorcade, where he was taken into custody, processed, and taken upstairs to face the judge. His arraignment is the first step in what's expected to be a lengthy legal battle. Trump pled not guilty to all charges. Manhattan District Attorney Alvin Bragg stated that these are felony crimes in the state of New York, no matter who you are. During his indictment, demonstrators on both sides gathered. This is the part that I couldn't stand. They gathered on both sides, gathered in a nearby park, including prominent Trump supporter U.S. Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene. Trump's next hearing is scheduled for December, roughly 2 months before the start of the 2024 primaries, while he's also facing other investigations and potential charges, including accusations of election interference in Georgia. And that is this week's Christian News Roll. Yeah, his next appearance in court is not in June. It's not in May. It's not even in July. It's in December.
Yeah, well, I don't understand. There's somebody could probably come up with a plausible reason why this is what they wanted to be able to do, but I think you're asking for trouble. The longer that continues to play out, I think a lot of people. It's not just because I want to see things finally get resolved. That would be good, but I would also like to have things not interfere because if a lot of people don't remember this, but you've got a caucus, Iowa caucuses, and New Hampshire primaries, and they come very early in the year. And well, I realize that candidate Trump is already a candidate.
Right.
But there's not been any kind of the base, and nobody has come together for having an official a caucus or primary or anything that shows that who's in front. Well, yeah, right now you could say he is, but he is by default. I think you'd have to say
There's a few other people running.
There's a few other people. That is true. And I know that Nikki Haley, for instance, I believe is running. So that's a person. I don't know who else is also definitely thrown in a hat into that race. But it would be good to have as many things already settled out before you get into the overtly political system, because, well, that's what's going to happen next. Is if you drag this out through all of 2023, then you're going to hit up into the months in 2024 when both of the parties are trying to get their particular candidate to run for the November presidential election. I think it's pretty easy in the Democrat side, but there's a lot of, everybody keeps, here's another thing. Everybody keeps thinking that Governor DeSantis, where you're at, that he'll probably announce at some point his candidacy.
He might.
So
I think it depends on how long this plays out and how many other people get into the running, because the way Trump won the nomination before was because there were so many people sucking up votes that,
all you have to do is have one. You just have to have, you can be a minority, but you just have to be one more voter than the other minorities. Yeah.
Right. So, that's a thing that's about to happen again.
That's what it looks like.
Yeah. So
he's,
DeSantis throwing in now. Some people believe that DeSantis could win the nomination. Maybe. What matters is whether he believes he can.
Right. Okay.
So he might sit it out. Yeah, sure. You might say strike while the iron's hot, but the iron is going to get struck quite a bit in the next year and a half. So who knows what that iron's going to look like whenever, everything gets all settled in. It may be that it would be better to run later because, if Trump wins 4 more years, if Biden wins 4 more years, they'd finally have a clear field.
Yeah.
So maybe he might do that. And he's not 70 or 80 years old. So, he's not quite up there yet. You've got to reach that certain plateau. You've got to be an old person before you run.
All right. Stop it.
Excuse me. I'm sorry. It's just this whole thing is just annoying because, go home, old people. You're drunk. Speaking of drunk, that's a nice segue, don't you think? Do you want to talk you said there was something that I mentioned and I thought, I wonder what it was what did I say about Brian Houston? Because I got to the point
you got to the point. Well, but that was after that. Yes, that's technically, how is the man still alive? I know what it is you were mentioning.
You
talk about that's like taking a pint of his blood out of his body and replacing it with a pint of alcohol.
Well, not quite, but it's working almost.
On it. He's working on it.
If you had 10 pints, you could say that. Well, not quite. We are talking about under a percentage, but if you could take 100 bottles and those 100 bottles happen to add up to 8 pints, and then you take one bottle away and put just straight up alcohol in that one, and just stand back and look at that for a second. There's not much poison in your system. I mean, that's where they say that you're blackout drunk, as in, whatever he is doing at the particular moment that they pulled him over, or whatever it is that happened.
What I was really referring to, and because I remember you made a nice distinction between taking full responsibility, quote unquote, and be willing to take the blame.
Oh yeah.
So there's people who do not understand that, if you're to blame, okay, then you have to do some things about that. And one thing is admit that you are to blame for the situation. Now, if there's other factors, you can mention those too. There's no reason not to. But this idea of taking full responsibility, but I'm not really the one to blame.
I learned that from a Nixon era joke.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah. Imagine Nixon saying, "I, of course, accept full responsibility, but not the blame.
Okay.
People are to blame lose their jobs. People who are responsible do not."
Okay. Good point. Good point.
Unless you're made to resign, which that's the reason why it's.
I don't think that. My favorite. You got your Nixon era saying, the one that Reagan era one that I like isn't going to come into a play here, but that's where plausible deniability. I don't think he has any. I don't think he can say
not anymore.
No,
I mean,
not anymore.
It's time to see if you can strike a deal. That's what you do.
That's
because if convicted, it's like, okay, well, maybe he doesn't want to be convicted like that. Maybe he wants to plead to some lesser charges.
Okay, maybe? I've got a caller on, so I've got to talk about this Joe Rigney. So he's Twin Cities. Okay, that's Minnesota. He's got ties to John Piper. That's a well-known person. And
he's a Baptist, and John Piper is more Reformed than he is Baptist anymore.
No argument. So he's the president of Bethlehem, or was the president of Bethlehem College and Seminary in Minneapolis. Anyway, so what is he resigning over? Well, it's simply a divergence of vision. Mm-hmm. How about it's more like he's on a lot of different pages. Some of them sound like, for instance, the fact that he's reconsidering the whole idea of baptism as infant baptism to be included, or whether they misnamed believers baptism. The idea that, well, we're going to wait until you're already kind of a confessing believer and then we'll baptize you. That's probably how he's most out of step with that institution. But I don't think it helps that he's chummy with this Doug Wilson, who is this Idaho pastor, and he's made noises about Christian nationalism. So
there are lots of Christian nationalists in the Baptist convention. There are lots of them.
Right.
I am not convinced at all that anyone cares if this Rigney is Christian nationalist. I really do think that it's about, like here it says, out of step with several distinctives which Baptists have erroneously, I'm doing it now, historically viewed as biblical.
Right.
So there are a lot of them. It's not just infant baptism or baptism in general. There are a lot of things that are erroneous, I guess, is the way to put it.
Well, we could really do. We're not going to do it today, but we could really take a whole couple shows, and just go through some of the main points about how we understand baptism. Because here's what it really comes down to. If I thought baptism was or is what a Baptist thinks it is, I wouldn't baptize infants either. It's not just about a matter of finding the right age at which to baptize a person. You have to start with the right understanding of what is happening in baptism. And then when you start with that understanding, which by the way is the church's historical understanding, it's like you go back through church history, and people have thought this and confessed this, well, really from the beginning, so it's not that infant baptism was a strange thing that came up later on, only in the, I don't know, fourth century or something like that. It's like, no, no, there was people having their whole families baptized, and that was from the early times. So we can talk about that at some point, maybe soon. I don't know.
Hmm.
Um, and
Just
as
crack
far as
open the catechism.
yeah, well, I mean, it sure is a good place to start, and really hits all the major points. Um, and then this Baptist church, apparently the one that has brought suit against the
Oh,
the
the one in
Air
Texas. Yeah.
Force. Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
you're right. I mean, in fact, I remember that was it was really tragic. I believe, am I right? Was it the pastor's wife or his daughter or both
I
who was
think it
among the
was the
victims?
daughter, but I
Yeah.
don't. I'd have to look that up to find out.
I
It's been
mean,
a long time.
what
But
a
what I do remember
heart-wrenching
was
thing.
that the building stood. They actually redid the inside of the building as a kind of a memorial.
Yes.
So they had inside a seat for everybody that
Yes.
with their name on it. They
I
painted
remember
the inside white.
I remember
And
seeing pictures
yeah,
of what it was transformed into.
yeah. And but they recently raised it though.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, I mean, how long can you? How, I mean, unless you build a proper monument, which that could, I mean, maybe with this they can, build a proper monument, but you still have to maintain the house, the building, and
Yeah.
you still have to like clean it, and you still have to pay the taxes on it, and you still have to all the
Well,
things that
churches
goes along
usually
with
don't
it.
pay taxes on the property, but okay,
Well,
so
whatever
understood.
kind of thing comes up.
Right.
Um,
So the settlement is going to pay victims and their families over $144 million. That is a good chunk of change.
mhm.
So,
Hopefully, it
and
makes somebody.
so then the next question is, I mean, okay, yes, punitive damages, and so that's supposed to give people some sense of, well, closure, or at least that their grievance, their legitimate grievance was heard. But it doesn't answer the question, why didn't the Air Force put that name in the national database?
You could blame a bureaucracy, I suppose. Somebody didn't finish what they were supposed to at the end of the day someday and then forgot that they had. Um, I'm kind of inclined that he knew somebody who knew somebody who kind of left that out.
That could be. I
Um,
mean, there's no way to know it, but well,
there might be. I mean, it might have
unless
been
somebody
part of
comes
this.
forward.
Yeah,
Somebody would have to come forward and say, "I'll tell you exactly how that went down."
yeah.
But
But I
absent
don't think the
that,
judge was so concerned about that part. Is like because if that were the case, then the Air Force could prosecute that on their own.
right.
In this case, it's about liability, and the judge came with a 60% liable. 40% of it is the guy who got the guns and did the thing. The
Yeah.
rest of it is dropping the ball and dropping the ball and dropping the ball.
Okay, so you can argue whether you think 60 is a fair percentage, or too high or too low. I realize liability is an important factor here. More important than even the liability is, can you prevent something like that from happening again? That might be really nice.
You mean
Make
the
sure.
question really is are there any more people who were convicted or discharged for various crimes from any given military branch of the United States whose name did not get reported to where it was supposed to be reported? That's actually a question.
That's a good question, because you don't want people who have a history, underscore that, a history
Right.
of creating problems to, they have easy access, the same as, say, a law abiding citizen, to the same guns and other, I guess the body armor, things that, well, how many people really go out and buy body armor? Think about that.
Well, but see, here's the thing: is like, there's a lot of arguments that are made about, well, you can use guns to hunt, which is true. I don't think the deer are going to be shooting back.
I don't think so either.
So, I mean, body armor. Whenever I was younger, if we were going to go hunting, was you just put on a jacket. One
of those
depended on
ones,
whether
right?
it was cold out or not.
Yeah, well,
because what did you need body armor for?
It's not going to stop a bullet, but maybe it'll just, maybe that bright orange color will tell people not to shoot at you. That would be good.
Oh yeah, that's true. Because these days, you're supposed to wear. Maybe the body armor is bright orange. Is it?
I don't know.
No, I don't think.
I don't think so.
I don't think it was. So yeah, hopefully they put in some things in place that says, yep, the entire record of anybody who's being discharged from this particular branch of the military is going to be uploaded everywhere that it's supposed to be uploaded from now on, or else. That would be nice to hear that happened.
Probably somewhere they already say that they're doing that. They probably already have something in writing somewhere that says, and this is what our procedure is for handling a situation like this. Okay, just do what your own procedure tells or says that you're going to do. We're not asking for you to create anything novel.
Yeah, you don't need a law that says follow that law. You shouldn't need that.
Totally.
Like let's say that there's actually 11 commandments, and you get to the part that says thou shalt not kill, and then the next commandment is thou shalt not disobey the law, thou shalt not kill. It's like, what? You don't need that. It just said thou shalt not kill. Thou shalt not mess up whenever you're inputting the information into the thing, even though that was what you were supposed to do in the first place. No, you don't need that. You just need to tell people, do what was right in the first place.
Do what was right. Do what you said you were going to do. That would be really, a very helpful start. So
now I'm sure that there's some legal-minded people out there that just now said, there actually are laws that says don't break that law. It just dawned on me that I'm probably wrong about that. That there are probably plenty of laws on the books that says, that just basically reiterates that is illegal. And we know we've already said that it is, but we're saying it is again. I'm sure that's, and the reason is because for the most part, the people who run our governments are not lawyers. So
no, that's not true. Most of them are lawyers. They haven't practiced law in a long, long, long time.
Oh, well,
a lot of them did pass the bar at one time. So a surprising number.
Well, they were asleep in the part of the class that said, you actually don't need extra laws to say.
It was interesting when I went to Concordia Seminary in St. Louis, the class that I started with, we had two lawyers that, they actually decided they wanted to walk away from the legal life and become pastors. And, that's cool. I mean, they each had their good reasons. But the reason I bring it up is that one of them was a trial lawyer. He'd defend clients, and, they'd stand before the judge and he'd be their legal counsel. The other was not that kind of lawyer. The other kind of lawyer wrote laws for the state legislature. So, it's exactly the kind of thing that, you want to have your laws be concise, but you also not so concise that you don't cover every conceivable little corner case. You really want them to be able to do everything that this particular legislation is going to claim it's going to do for you. So it's got to be legal when they pass it. So that was just interesting. Which gets back to why.
Well, speaking of interesting, what are we going to, this is almost kind of a silly question. What are we going to talk about on the other side of the break?
Well, you know what? I think we should talk about the resurrection of our Lord. We can just talk about Easter, and specifically, maybe we're going to talk about what leads up immediately to Easter. So not something, there's plenty of opportunity for our listeners to hear the good news. We're going to present the good news, but you're going to hear that in your congregations, in your pulpits on Easter Sunday, no doubt. The thing that we don't talk as much about, I know I haven't, is some of the other things that are leading up right to the Easter, including that what we generally have is that Saturday, which is some congregations will hold a vigil on Saturday. Call it Holy Saturday. We'll talk a little bit about that.